I grew up in the 60s, 70s time period when there was such a thing as a movement lawyer. And these were people who were in the news, defending people who were fighting against the Vietnam War. I saw women lawyers in Hawaii always standing up for workers, poor people, women, the rights of people who had been excluded from the so-called American dream. And that just seemed like a great way to use skills that I had. I found out that in academia, you could really research the history, the economics, the sociology of it, and say what you really want to say in a careful way, which is different from being an advocate. You're really exploring all sides of an issue and listening to everyone's perspective and then trying to translate that for an audience. And I just found that that work was deeply gratifying to me, particularly when I could share it with students, with generations of students that were trying to figure out what was wrong with the world and how to fix it. Getting justice for people who need it is not a straight line. There's going to be wins and losses, but I see the work I do as a research arm for the movements that are struggling for the wins. Critical race theory is a movement, an intellectual movement that began in the 80s. Some of us were looking at the American legal system and asking the question, why, if we've passed the Civil Rights Act that said everyone should have equal access to jobs, to education, to housing, why were we still excluded? We were trying in critical race theory to describe that and to explain how it changes. And the way it changes is first you acknowledge that institutions have become racist because we live in a racist country with a racist history. And the only way to undo that is to affirmatively commit to anti-racism. And people are scared because that requires changes and it requires people giving up power and privilege and sharing it in a true democracy. At every university I taught at, I was the only Asian woman. So at the University of Hawaii, where I first got tenure, Stanford, where I visited, UCLA, where I was the first Asian to be hired, and Georgetown, where I was the first Asian to be hired. And it really shows how Asian Americans have been excluded from positions of leadership, particularly in the law. Over the years, I've worked with civil rights organizations all over the country that are struggling to help our communities. And what I've seen is that everywhere I go, there are NAPABA lawyers representing immigrants and refugees, putting pressure on institutions to make sure that there's representation of the Asian American community when big decisions are being made. Supporting people who are running for office. I am so grateful that NAPABA lawyers are doing that. And we have to envision a future that we're all working toward that honors what our ancestors were trying to do for us, make a better life where we can survive and thrive. And we're in danger of making that impossible for the next generation. But together, I think we can turn that around.
NAPABA proudly presents the 2020 Daniel K. Inouye Trailblazer Award to Mari Matsuda.